Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. Today we're celebrating the end of May with a special Best of May episode plus a brand new story. We've got 13 lucky stories in total, and the show runs 2 hours or more. So sit back, relax, and get ready for this all-new story called Dogman Interrupted My Marriage Proposal. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm writing to send you the story of how my personal life got intruded upon by none other than the legendary American Dogman. This happened a long time ago, June 2nd, 1995 to be precise. I had been dating my girlfriend, let's call her Mary Sue, for almost 1 full year, and I sensed she wanted to get more serious. I had a decent paying job working at my father's company, and I thought I was ready to get married. I was 22 though, so what did I really know? It was a beautiful night out. The stars were shining. The crickets were chirping. And Mary Sue had just come over to have dinner with me and my parents. After we ate, she and I went outside to the front porch to get some air. I was prepared with the engagement ring in my pocket, but first I had to set the mood. It soon became clear that this would be impossible, since my father decided to be in a grouchy mood and shout nasty things at my mother, loud enough for us to hear out in front of the house. I had saved up for months to be able to afford that ring, and I didn't want to lose my chance to ask her that night, so I suggested we go around to the back of the house instead of the front. When we got around there, it was darker than either of us had expected. I noticed the back porch light was blown, so I went inside to get a new one. My father was being a complete idiot in there, and I closed the door behind me to try to prevent Mary Sue from hearing him bellowing. Obviously, this was rude to say the least, leaving her outside in the pitch darkness, but the only other option would be to invite her into the hellish domain of Captain Buzzkill, aka Dear Old Dad. Rushing back out and screwing the light in while not being able to see what I was doing, I tried very hard to stay in a good mood and not become as grouchy as someone else had become. Finally getting the light to come on, I turned around and saw the backyard, which sure looked smaller than it had when I was a kid. It used to seem endless to me when I was growing up, but not any longer. Still, it was surrounded in the back not by a fence, but by woods that led off in some directions for over a mile. It was a beautiful scene, made lovelier by Mary Sue smiling at me. It was finally quiet enough to talk, and so we did. After a while, we got in a bit more of a romantic mood, and I grew nervous, realizing the time was fast approaching when I would actually be asking her to marry me. I felt like I was in the home stretch, and my mind raced to figure out the best way to get from where we were in the conversation to where I needed us to go. Then, suddenly, something burst out of the woods, running directly at us. The noise of the thing emerging from the trees took us by surprise, and I think we both shouted a bit before we had even turned to see what it was. And what it was a deer. A big buck. A male with huge antlers. If you've never had an immense adult deer looking terrified and running directly toward you, then trust me, it is not a comfortable experience. It saw us and turned away only a few feet in front of the porch, then made a sharp left and continued running up the driveway and out of our lives. As frightening as that experience had been, that's how funny it seemed to both of us afterward. She imitated me acting scared of the deer, and I imitated her, and we both laughed so hard that we were gasping for air. "What else could happen?" she asked me, giggling, as if in answer. Something else burst out of the woods, again heading directly toward us. This time, it was not a deer. This time, it was the thing that had caused the deer to be so frightened and to run away like it had. This was not a herbivore running toward us this time. Instead, this was a predator. No, it was not a mountain lion, which we do sometimes have in our area. It was not a coyote, which also sometimes roam around here. It was not a bear, although I've never heard of those coming around. It was something that isn't even supposed to exist that came out at us, and it was running on its hind legs. It was not a man, but its silhouette was not that far off from that of a man. It was eye level with my eyes, and I was standing on a porch that I think is about 1.5 to 2 feet off the ground. I'm just under 6 feet, and I think I had already reached my full height by that time, so this monster had to be 7 feet tall or taller. No, it was not a man, or a Bigfoot, or a skunk ape, or any kind of primate at all. It was an upright, walking, dog-headed something. Its head looked like a Halloween mask more than a real head, but that body was real for sure, not a costume. Its eyes seemed bright in the darkness, but I'm not thinking they glowed as some people report. I think the eyes reflected our back porch light, the way cat's eyes can do. When it caught sight of us, it stopped walking, paying full attention to the both of us. We both instinctively took a step back. I wanted to go inside, but Mary Sue was between me and the door, so I opted to take a step forward instead, to put myself between her and the impossible dog beast in front of us. That seemed to have been a mistake, as the Dogman apparently took it as a challenge, and he inhaled sharply and then roared at us. It was so loud, my ears were ringing. Even so, I could hear Mary Sue crying in surprise and fear. I held her, and she folded into my arms, not in a loving way, but in a terrified, shocked way. The beast was still eyeing us as though sizing us up to decide if we were a threat or if we were dinner. He must have decided we were neither, as he then proceeded to run off in the same direction that the deer had gone. I told Mary Sue that we were safe, that the werewolf thing had gone, and she let it all out, crying as hard as she felt like. I held her, and in that moment, I felt like that was where I belonged, holding and supporting the woman I loved. Then the back door crashed open loudly, and Mary Sue screamed. It was my father. "Quiet down out here," he shouted angrily. "One more outburst like that last one, and I'll can you from your job," he threatened. That was all Mary Sue could take, and she collapsed into pathetic tears once again, but worse than before. I glared at my father and walked her toward my car, which was in the same direction that the two animals had run. My father called after us rudely, asking me what stupid thing I had done to make the girl cry. What a sweet fellow. So, Mary Sue and I were never the same again. I'm not sure which was worse, the Dogman encounter, which I have to admit did seem like a very bad omen, or my father's terrible behavior. To this day, my mother blames my father for the fact that Mary Sue and I broke up instead of getting married. Oh, he played his part in it, that's for certain, but I don't blame him. Instead, I blame the Dogman that interrupted my marriage proposal. Don't go away. We've got another scary Dogman story starting right now. Tonight we're going to try an experiment. We have a short animated film that tells one story, and it's not narrated by me or Dogman or Dr. Death or Madeline Starr or anybody. It's narrated by this old dude here who claims it happened to him. Take it away, old dude. The hideous face outside the window, as told to Peter Bernard. You know, when I was a boy, my parents would leave me off with my two uncles as often as they could. My uncles were fun guys, and they treated me like they treated anyone else. Even though I was a kid, they expected me to do my share of the work. They never treated me like a kid in any way, and that's why I loved being around them. But one time, their light-hearted, playful lifestyle led to me coming face to face with an actual, real-life Dogman. Of course, we didn't call them Dogman back then. I didn't anyway. I called it a werewolf, and in fact, that's what I thought it was. I still think that, and you'll see why if you pay attention. So, my uncles took me out to their cabin in the woods because they wanted to do some hunting. We hunted all day, then got back to the cabin just in time before nightfall hit. Now, we didn't have any electricity in that cabin, but we did have a fireplace. Both of my uncles had been drinking something strong-smelling all afternoon, and when we got back, they both passed out without even making me dinner. I kept beef jerky and candy bars in the place for such occasions so I wouldn't starve. Usually they would at least light the fire for me before going to bed, but not this night. Reasoning that I was old enough to figure out how to start the fire myself, I set about trying to do just that. The thing is, I couldn't actually get any of the wood to light on fire. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was damp, or maybe I just didn't know what I was doing. I tried, one at a time, to wake up my uncles, but neither of them was going to wake up until they had slept off their drink. It was like trying to raise the living dead, and I soon gave up. Then, there came a knocking on the door that almost gave me a heart attack. Who would be knocking in the middle of the night, in the middle of a forest? Now, whoever it was started shouting something. They banged more frantically and screamed like a lunatic. They sounded manic. Maybe they were having an episode. Maybe they were an escaped convict or mental patient. I had never been so frightened in all my life. I tried more fervently to shake either uncle awake, but had no success in either case. Now whoever it was seemed to be trying to open the door from the other side. I was glad that there was no fire or light coming from inside. I did my best to hide it in the shadows and watch. Soon, whoever it was moved over past the door and looked in the window. It was the most frightening face I had ever seen, and I let out a slight noise of shock. Even outside, the ugly man heard me and looked in my direction. He didn't seem to focus, though, so I held perfectly still, hoping that I was still hidden in the shadows. The man tapped on the window and leaned in closer. I could see the face a little better now, and I wasn't even sure I was looking at a human. I wasn't sure what that thing was out there. When I get to this part of the story, people usually ask me if it had a dog or a wolf's face, but no, it did not. It was just the ugliest face in the world, that's all I can remember. And it was trying to find me. I cried as quietly as I could, and I tried not to sniffle. I prayed for my uncles to wake up, and I prayed for the man thing to go away. And then he did. Go away, I mean. The man thing went away. After a while, I decided to head toward the front door and peer outside. I wanted to see what kind of tracks that thing made. I had only seen its head. I didn't know what its body looked like or if it wore clothes or anything. Even though I was pretty sure it was gone, I crept as quietly as I could until I was finally at the front window. I looked out, but I didn't see footprints or animal tracks of any kind at all out there. So I leaned over closer to look harder when... The face was there inches from me on the other side of the window, and it was screaming something at me, something I couldn't understand. The next thing I knew, there was an explosion in front of me and on top of me, the loudest thing I had ever heard. I dropped down, and as I did so, I heard a loud smacking kind of noise behind me. Turning around quickly, I saw something out of Egyptian mythology. It was a man, but it had a dog's head. No, it was a dog, but it stood like a man. It had a strange, confused expression on its face. Then it fell to the floor right next to me. It was dead. Almost immediately, it stopped looking like it did. It kind of melted into the form of a man. A dead or sleeping man on the floor. I had seen a werewolf execution, and I had seen the wolf turn back into a man. Turning back to the hideous face at the window, I saw he was trying to talk to me. He wasn't a monster at all, just an ugly old hunter. Same as my uncles, but much older. My ears were ringing so loudly that I couldn't hear what he was saying. Through a combination of him shouting and me reading his lips, I got that he was asking me a question.
Why didn't you open when I knocked? I was warning you that I saw a werewolf walk in your back door!
Wow, I didn't see that coming. My grandparents saw a Dogman, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. I am a college senior, and I love all the channels on YouTube which have Dogman stories on them. I want to see a Dogman myself, even though I also find the idea terrifying. I admit I don't want to get hurt or anything. I'm not a daredevil. I think if I did see a Dogman, I might faint. I don't go out looking for them because I know that most people who see them report back that they are evil and possibly demonic. If I ever do see the creature, it's going to be completely by chance. But still, a guy can dream. So I was telling all this to my grandfather, who's a fairly cool guy actually. Like, there's that joke about Grandpa Simpson going on about his childhood and sounding like a crazy old dude. But when my grandfather tells me about his youth, it's all stories about Jimi Hendrix and Harry Nilsson and people like that. Anyway, like I was saying, I told my grandpa that I wished I could see a dogman, and he started telling me that he didn't know what a dogman was, but he once saw a dog that walked upright like a man. I got really excited and I was like, Grandpa, that's exactly what a dogman is. And I begged him to tell me the story. To my surprise, this was not a story from a long time ago. It was from last autumn in 2017. He and Grandma were driving in the Catskills in their old station wagon that I don't think they'll ever sell. They were either coming back from or going up to see some show. They like to stay in a hotel up in the mountains and go to see live entertainment. So anyway, they got a flat tire and they called for AAA and they waited. Grandpa has this thing where he doesn't feel there are any coincidences. So when he gets stuck anywhere or anytime, he figures there's a reason for it. Like, if he just misses the walk sign and has to wait at a street corner, he looks around for some meaning in the moment. Why am I stuck right here, right now, for the next full minute? That's Grandpa. He says he's not religious, but to me, that is a show of great faith in the universe on his part. And it's one of the things about him that I think are cool. Grandma, on the other hand, rolls her eyes each time he gets like that and calls him insulting nicknames, like the Baba Yabba Dabba Doo and stuff like that. So Grandpa gets these binoculars he carries with him in his glove compartment out, and Grandma rolls her eyes as Grandpa scans their location 360 degrees, looking for the meaning of this flat tire. Then, Grandpa saw something pretty meaningful. He pulled down the binoculars and looked with his bare eyes. There it was. He pointed to it and asked Grandma if she saw what he saw. Grandma stopped rolling her eyes and joined Grandpa in stunned amazement. There, about 100 to 150 feet down the road, they could see a dog. A really, really big dog walking across the highway on its hind legs. I have since asked Grandma about this, and she says she saw this thing too, but she claims she never rolls her eyes at her husband. So, Grandpa's description was that it looked like the world's largest black terrier. That didn't sound very frightening to me, but he said it scared the two of them all right. It was like a prehistoric, bipedal terrier with massive muscles. It looked like it could walk off with a medium-sized cow, according to Grandma, who is by far the more restrained of the two of them. Now, it was walking from their right to their left and away from them. Neither of them are sure if the creature saw them or not, but they think most likely it hadn't noticed them parked off on the side of the highway, behind it and to its left. They watched as this thing that Grandma described as looking like the Hulk dressed as a furry walked away from them and into the woods. Then the AAA lady showed up and Grandpa got out to guard her against bears, quote-unquote, while she changed their tire. Neither of them told her about the immense walking dog, since they didn't want to seem like they'd overdosed on their meds. And that's about it, as far as they can recall. They drove on soon afterward, and they haven't seen anything else strange since then. And that's the story of the time my grandparents saw a Dogman. Memorial Day Dogman. When I was a kid, we used to spend Memorial Day at my Uncle Jenkins and Aunt Lydia's mansion. At least we called it a mansion, it seemed large to us. The main thing about it that gave it a regal air was a long, manicured back lawn that led off into the distance, ending in the entrance to a somewhat old-growth forest. And that was where on Memorial Day when I was 13 years old that I saw an actual upright walking canid. The year I turned 13 was not my good luck year. My parents turned from a loving couple who cared about me to selfish individuals who at best looked at me with dead eyes. Dead was preferable to their angry eyes. They went from caring if I was tucked into bed comfortably to not caring to remember if I had gotten dinner. They only cared about defeating their spouse in some way, constantly competing. I had become a nuisance, just an obstruction in between them and winning another argument. I missed my parents, and the emotional pain of it was made worse by having to interact daily with these soulless corpses inhabiting my parents' bodies, doing sick little impersonations of people that I used to know and love. For that reason, it was almost a relief when they announced they would be spending Memorial Day separately. I requested to be able to go see Uncle Jenkins and Aunt Lydia and was told in a very cold manner by my mother that Uncle Jenkins was dead. She asked Aunt Lydia if I could come anyway and had gotten her assent for me to spend the entire week with her. I remembered all our previous Memorial Days as being warm and sunny. Too warm sometimes, in that way early summer can be, before you're really used to it. This Memorial Day, though, felt cold and gray and rainy. The skies seemed dark the entire weekend, and the fact that it was only 13-year-old me and grieving Aunt Lydia made it seem quieter and darker. When it wasn't raining, it was windy and cold and threatening to rain. We sat in the large dining room eating, just the two of us, with lightning flashing outside the windows. Sometimes we would invite the cook and the maid to join us eating. It made it more fun because we could allow them to initiate and steer the conversation. We'd talk about popular TV shows and recent public events. When Aunt Lydia and I were left alone, sometimes we'd begin to talk about my parents or Uncle Jenkins, and we'd get ourselves feeling as dark as the weather. It got so I'd see my aunt at breakfast and then again at dinner, and I'd spend the day wandering the Addams family mansion she lived in. It used to have a large family. I forget how many kids Aunt Lydia once had living there, but it was at least 3 at a time. I think she adopted kids too, but I'm not sure if that was before, after, or while she was raising her own biological offspring as well. There were rooms that had formerly been inhabited but were now mostly emptied out, and there were rooms with someone else's stuff still left in them. It would look like someone from 10 or 20 years ago was currently living right in that room and would walk through that door any moment to do their homework. I got the impression that once Aunt Lydia's kids left home, they really left. I wondered if any of them had ever come back to visit her, and if not, I wondered why not. Aunt Lydia and I weren't exactly best friends, and in truth I barely knew her, but she always seemed like a kind sort. Even having me out for Memorial Day weekend to endure a 13-year-old invading her quiet space, that seemed like an act of kindness to me even at the time. If it weren't for her, I'd have had to have gone with one of my parents off to be ignored and rescheduled by the animated corpse of my formerly loving guardian. I can hear you all out there. You're saying stop whining about your childhood and go take a walk in the forest. That's where the Dogman is. Well, yes, but no. I wasn't going for a walk the first time I saw Dogman out there. I was gazing out through the big window looking out on the back lawn. It was around dusk. We had just finished eating dinner. I was gazing out the window, watching the colors of the sky change, when I thought I saw something moving in the trees off in the distance. I would notice it peripherally, but when I would look directly at the spot, I couldn't be sure. I asked one of the servants if my aunt or uncle had any binoculars, and one of them brought me an antique-looking telescope. I aimed it quickly at the trees but saw nothing. I watched until dark, then realized it would be pointless to go on any longer, so I made a mental note to be back at the telescope before dusk the following night. There would be fireworks just after sunset, being set off directly on the other side of this patch of forest, and easily viewable from the picture window. That was my favorite part of each trip up here, the fireworks in the air over the forest. It looked like the beginning of the old Walt Disney Wonderful World of Color TV show, the magical and mythical beginning of summer. The next morning after breakfast, I walked the length of the yard and searched around for any kind of sign of someone or something having been there where I thought I saw something the night before. The ground was muddy and I saw only one set of tracks, which were of a dog or cat but very large. Not a house cat or pet dog, I thought. Then again, maybe footprints in the mud expand to make them look larger? I tried putting a boot print from my boot next to one of the paw prints, and I was disturbed to find out that the paw print came out about the same size in the end. How big was this dog or cat anyhow? It looked as though the animal had walked into the forest, so I naively wandered in to see if I could get close enough to get a look at the thing. I still wasn't sure what I was looking for. At that point, I was still assuming I had seen a four-legged creature out of my peripheral vision the night before. I had not seen it clearly enough to discern if it were even actually there, but these footprints seemed to say it was. Everywhere was muddy under the tree canopy, and I slipped almost immediately, catching myself on a tree trunk before I fell. It was extremely easy to follow the tracks, which is not a statement I had made before that day or ever again since. I'm not exactly a tracker, I'm a city boy, but on that day, those tracks stood out like they had been drawn in day-glow colors. I followed them, but as I mentioned already, I'm not a tracker. So at some point or another, I looked up and realized I had no idea where I was or how to get back to the house. I was starting to get hungry for lunch, but I had no idea what direction lunch might be in. Now, this stretch of forest I was lost in was a fairly narrow patch from Aunt Lydia's backyard over to the other side where the fireworks would be set off. That was maybe a 10-minute walk straight through the forest on a little dirt path. The forest, however, continued in two other directions for miles and widened almost immediately on either side, so you could get lost very quickly if you went any way other than on that one little dirt path. I stood in the forest, starting to panic a little, trying to remember if the fireworks were east of Aunt Lydia's house, or north, west maybe, or she was west and they were east. And then I heard a growling noise. It was really deep and vibrated my whole body. I looked around and around, spinning in a circle. I couldn't even tell which direction it was coming from. That was a very unsettling feeling to not know which direction a sound was coming from. It didn't make sense, and at that age, I was very literal. I was a kid, but I was growing up. This was like something unnatural or supernatural happening, and my mind had no place for that. The supernatural was only something from the movies. Then I saw the eye shine in the bushes, and all at once the sound was only coming from that one direction. I was now in danger of losing my life because of the angry-looking eyes in the dark ahead, but at least I understood what direction the growl was coming from. If I were going to be eaten alive, it would at least be by a natural creature whose existence made logical sense. That mattered a lot to me for whatever reason. I guess I was sort of a materialist or a literalist back then. So when the eye shine in the bushes started to move up in the air, I felt that weird feeling in my belly again, about how this was something that should not be happening, and things seemed all wrong all over again. The eyes rose above my line of vision and kept going. No, this creature could not be that tall. Then they went further up in the air and disappeared behind some leaves. Maybe it was flying away? Maybe those were birds' eyes and they were flying away? Except I knew they weren't. They were the binocular eyes of some kind of mammalian predator. And so, when the aforementioned predator walked forward and stared at me, I was at once both shocked and yet unsurprised as this dark, kangaroo-like dog towered over me and roared. When I say kangaroo-like, I mean it stood upright like a kangaroo. It held its arms in front of itself and had very strong hind legs. It did not hop though, it walked and later ran, sort of like a human, but with the arms held out in front, not swinging as a human's arms do. It would run sort of bent over with its tail held out straight back, but that happened later. At this point it just towered over me, looking to see what I would do in reaction to its roar. I did nothing. I might have been in shock, or maybe I was just a very unoriginal kid, but I stood there, probably with my mouth open, unable to do anything at all. They say don't make eye contact with a strange dog, that it can enrage the animal. Well, I had made eye contact, nose contact, fangs contact, claws contact, and more because I looked that thing over a few times. I think my eyes were the only part of me even capable of moving. Until, that is, the creature took a step toward me. That's when I suddenly found myself running as fast as I could in the mud, trying to put some distance between myself and that thing. So what exactly was I running from? Well, it was covered in mud, as I was in the process of becoming as well while running from this monster. It was a hairy beast covered in long matted fur. It was taller than an adult man, even when bent over and running like a velociraptor from a Steven Spielberg movie. It had a long snout like a dog, but seemed different than any dog I had ever seen before. It had pointed dog ears that sat on top, but sort of further apart from each other than normal dog ears. They were sort of almost on the sides. It had a face like a pit bull, and the hair was very short around the face like that sort of dog, but it was dark in color and the snout was longer like Anubis from ancient Egypt. I remember a lot of running, and I remember feeling like I couldn't possibly go on, yet I also remember going on. It was a terrible day, just running and running from the creature. I finally climbed a tree that had a big nook in it about 18 feet off the ground. I laid back in the little saddle-shaped space and cried and panted until I had nearly caught my breath. I could hear the creature approaching through the foliage, but was literally too tired to even lift my head to look. I couldn't disguise my extreme panting and weeping either, so the canine monster could immediately see and hear me there. He settled in underneath me and began a sort of vigil. I guess he figured I had to come down eventually, and when I did, he would have lunch. I remember laying on my back watching the sky above me and hearing the creature breathing below me. I fell asleep from exhaustion and must have slept for an hour or so. I woke up, and the surprise of realizing I was in a tree and not in my bed almost caused me to slip off my branch and plummet to the earth. Recovering my balance, I laid back on the branch, too terrified to move a muscle for minutes or longer. I laid there until my back ached, and then I turned over and a chill went through me seeing the immense monster still down there below me. How long could that thing wait for me? How could something so large be walking around these woods so close to civilization and not be taught in school books? I used to get books about Bigfoot and monsters, and there had never been anything like this creature I was staring at, just a few feet underneath me. This was back in the 70s. We used to read paperback books from the Scholastic Book Club about Loch Ness Monster and so forth. I couldn't believe I was seeing a monster that had never been in any of those books. I was now realizing I had to go to the bathroom, and I was hungry too. I wasn't able to get down the tree without the dogman grabbing me, and even if I managed to get away from him, I wondered which direction I should run in. Standing up, I climbed the last few branches in that tree which looked sturdy enough to support my weight, trying to get up as high as I could and maybe see the mansion. It was a no-go, as all I was able to really see from up there were more trees. I couldn't see the dogman below me from the upper branches, so I felt safer up there. I relieved myself, then wondered if I could eat tree leaves to relieve hunger. I knew I might be there for a while, and started to think in the long term. The hungrier I got, the sadder I got. My life had gone from one long happy ending to a feeling like there would never be a happy ending again. Even if I somehow evaded getting torn apart by a monster werewolf thing, I would still never have my life back that I had once had. I would never have my happy home with my parents. I sort of became an adult that day, sitting in that tree trying to outweight the hunger of an apex predator, waiting for me to make one wrong step and slip out of that tree. And so the day went. The most boring day ever, and yet the most excruciating and stressful as well. I watched as the creature groomed itself for a while, then I climbed up higher in the tree as the sun went down. The higher I went, the more of the waning light I had. This was growing more terrifying by the moment. The creature had actually waited under me for a full afternoon. Trying to get away from it in the dark, when now I was weakened by hunger, would probably be even less likely than getting away in the sunlight had been. I wept for myself, thinking it was becoming more and more of a likelihood that this was going to be the night that I would die. I sat on my perch high in the tree, watching all the light fade from the sky and the stars come out. I knew the names of a few constellations, so I looked for them. It seemed so weird to me that this knowledge I had would soon disappear when I was eaten by the Dogman. Why do we learn things when we are so finite? We live our lives like we're preparing to live forever. Maybe we should live our lives like this was our final hour instead. And as I thought about that, I heard what sounded like muskets firing off in the distance. Then I heard and felt a big boom shake the tree, and I thought for a second, it's World War III. What a day, first Dogman, then the end of the world. But as I looked around me, I saw fireworks, and I remembered that this was Memorial Day. It was time for the fireworks. My first thought was, at least I can enjoy a good show before I die. But then adrenaline shot through me when I realized that, judging by the direction and distance of the fireworks, I was actually a lot closer to the mansion than I had thought. I scrambled down the tree as quietly as I could and peered down at the Dogman, who was wandering off curiously in the direction of the explosive noises. I never heard the monster again that night, and I even got to see the end of the fireworks from the picture window. The cook had saved me some dinner, and nobody even questioned where I'd been all day. I don't think I ever told any of them what happened to me because I didn't want to be told I had to stay out of the woods. It didn't matter either way, as I had to go and live with my mother starting the next morning anyhow. It was no fun growing up with my parents separated and with an inattentive and self-obsessed mom going through some weird series of personal crises. But I have to say that the Memorial Day and evening I spent convinced I was about to be eaten by a carnivorous two-legged dog brought me an ability to appreciate what I have in whatever moment I'm existing in. Enjoy what you've got, because you don't know how much longer you're going to have it. And be grateful that, no matter how bad your life might get, at least you're not being stalked by Dogman. Red-eyed devil dog, walking by pedally, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. When I was 20 and 21, I used to hang out with some tough kids. We weren't bad though. I mean, we would hang out in cemeteries at night, but we never vandalized tombstones or anything. In fact, one time we chased out some kids who were knocking things down. We saw stuff that seemed like ghosts on a few occasions. They seemed like people, but they would just disappear, so they couldn't be people. There were a few times we got chased out by nighttime security guards. On one occasion, we got chased out by the Dogman. There was a church cemetery in Yonkers called St. Joseph's that we would hang out in a lot because it wasn't heavily guarded back in those days. It was, I think, the second cemetery of that church, and the tombstones went all the way back to the 1800s. A lot of religious people buried there, and at least one Monsignor. We never found any names on tombstones that we recognized, though. No famous show business people or anything like that. We took to calling it the churchyard just because it always felt a little like going to church. You always felt like you were being watched there and judged, and that you'd better be on your best behavior. So, one night we were hanging out and trying to cool off. It was October, but we were having what used to be called an Indian summer. I'm not sure what that means, but that's what we used to call it. So, my buddy Butch calls out to us that there's a dog in the yard, and we all just laugh. We went back to whatever we were talking about, but Butch got more insistent that we needed to pay attention to this dog. So I looked, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was a dog, all right, but black as night from head to foot. Its eyes were bright red, as though they were lit from within. It had to be the largest canine I had ever seen. and it was racing at top speed through the headstones directly toward us. Now, 3 out of 4 of us were on alert, and we stood up, discussing if we should leave or not. Maybe it was a guard dog. Maybe it was crazy and diseased. Our buddy Marco was still laughing that we were afraid of what he called a puppy. Then, that red-eyed puppy did something that shut Marco right up. The dog reared up on its hind legs like a bear, and it screamed. Now all of us were running to the car, tripping and falling over each other like comedians in a 1940s B-movie. We piled inside and argued over who had the keys. As the engine was finally being started, I looked back toward the dog, and I saw that it was leaping over the fence and exiting the cemetery to get us. We drove away, and that dog chased us almost a full block before giving up, all on its hind legs. As we drove off, it bellowed at us, as though warning us not to return. We never did. At least I never did. I'm pretty sure none of the others did either. I remember Butch and I went to the library and looked up black dogs and red-eyed dogs and devil dogs. We found that there is a tradition in the British Isles of haunted black dogs with red eyes that bring destruction and death with them. That shook us up a bit. We also learned about the Cadejo, which is basically the same thing, only from Mexico and Central America. How could both sides of the Atlantic have traditions about this animal? And where we saw it was neither Central America nor Great Britain. We saw it a few miles north of New York City in Yonkers. I think it's a real phenomenon, but I don't know if it's a real animal. I mean, I think it's real enough that it could eat you for dinner, but I don't know if it's real in the sense that you could study its biology or taxonomy. I think it's something supernatural or paranormal, although I do think it is physical when it wants to be. Maybe the fact that we saw it in the churchyard colors my opinion, but it seems to me to have some sort of religious or at least otherworldly context. None of my buddies died until last year, and this happened decades ago, so I don't think the devil dog was a symbol of death for us. Butch did go on to become a Marine, and their nickname is the Devil Dogs, so that's a bit of synchronicity. I didn't get the sense that the dog was there to end our lives, although he might have if we hadn't exited so quickly. I have felt for years that the upright walking devil dog we got chased by that night was there to wake us up. We were wasting our lives up to that point, but not so afterward. While we stayed buddies, we also started families and got jobs and didn't have time to hang out as much as we used to. And when we did hang out, it was no longer in haunted cemeteries. And I guess that was all because of the red-eyed devil dog who walked bipedally.
Take it away, oldie. Don't call me oldie. That's not my name. Ugh, he's gone already. I may not be young, but you know, Bigfoot is as old as the hills and nobody calls him oldie. Well, I guess sometimes they call him the old man of the mountain. I should call him Mountie, see how much he likes that. Boy, that really angries up my blood, but what can you do about it? Anyway, I've got 3 strange Dogman stories for you today. Dogman at the beach, perfect for the upcoming holiday weekend. Dogman in the sewer, and this first story, which we'll call On the Road with Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. This was something that happened to me years ago when I was in my early 20s and driving a truck delivering machine parts from the manufacturer to the companies that bought the equipment. One time, I was driving out in rural Pennsylvania all the way to Philadelphia from New York City. I have no memory of exactly where I was, but I remember driving down a 4-lane highway with mostly very little other traffic for a long time, surrounded by forest on both sides. And then I noticed I was running low on gas. The first station I found was located on a block with a big auto repair store and nothing else. Across the highway was forest as far as the eye could see. There was a dirt road just past the gas station, and then more forest. While the guy filled my tank, I got out of the truck to walk around and stretch my legs. Looking off into the trees, something caught my attention from my peripheral vision. I turned and looked and saw a hairy, man-like thing crossing that dirt road going away from me and toward the trees on the other side. I thought it was Bigfoot, and I let out a gasp. Somehow, it seems that the creature heard me, although how he could have over that far a distance, I'm not sure. A second after I gasped, he had moved out of the shadows enough for me to see that it actually had a short tail. I'm not sure what to compare the thing to, but it was a very short stump of a tail. It turned its head, and our eyes met and locked. I don't remember the color of its eyes, and I know from my recent studies that people often report yellow or amber eyes on Dogman. But this was in the bright daylight, and I was very surprised, so I don't remember much detail. It was dark-colored and furry and seemed very tall and wide. I can't really make an estimate of size because of the distance and my unfamiliarity with the actual size of the shrubbery around him and me, but my impression was that I was looking at someone the size and shape of a football player, American football player, but with tall, pointy dog ears that stood up and a stumpy little tail. I remember feeling like the heat of the day was overwhelming me, and I remember the feeling that I was swirling in a vortex. My next memory was the gas station attendant holding me up and calling out to me to wake me up. I had fallen forward into his arms when he was telling me how much I owed him. I steadied myself, and he was looking at me with alarm. He suggested I come inside his air-conditioned booth and have a cup of coffee. I declined the invitation and asked him if he had seen it. He looked at me as though I were losing my mind and asked, "Seen what?" I figured I'd only scare him more if I answered that question, so I paid the guy, got my receipt so I could be reimbursed by my boss, then started to get back in the cab to drive off. Now, the gas station attendant, looking truly worried, begged me to come inside and cool down before getting back on the road. He told me I could have coffee or water for free at his expense, but I felt like the sooner I got out of that area, the sooner I would feel better. So once again, I declined his invitation and drove off. An hour or two later, I was starting to feel normal again, and I began regretting not getting that coffee. I passed some signs for a rest stop coming up and resolved to take a break there, get something to eat and drink, and regroup. Getting to the rest area involved turning off the main highway to a smaller local highway, and as I got in the right lane and prepared to turn off, I saw it. Off in the distance, I saw it, clear as day, standing there on the off-ramp by the forest, right out in the daylight, there stood that same dark, pointy-eared Dogman. And he was staring my way. Panicked, I removed my eyes from looking in his direction, not wanting to faint again while I was driving. I turned the truck back on the main highway in a crazy and very unsafe left swerve and nearly skidded off the road. Barely making it back safely, I stomped on the gas to get away as fast as I could. It took me a few minutes to remember that we have speed limits here in America, and I slowed down to the legal limit. Fortunately, no authorities had been monitoring how fast I was driving during that panicked interval, so I was able to continue on uninterrupted. I didn't stop again until I had reached Philadelphia. After relieving myself and delivering the machinery, I stopped for dinner and also bought plenty of snacks to get me through my return trip. I was terrified of the drive back since it would need to be at night. I searched my old school paper map and found a different route that wouldn't take me too much longer, but which involved a toll road or two. I knew my boss wouldn't cover those tolls, and it would have to come out of my own money, but it seemed worth it to avoid the area in which I had seen the Dogman on the side of the road. Don't go away. If the old dude survives this next brief announcement, he'll be right back with another Dogman story.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
Dogman on the beach. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I remember a story I saw on your channel a while back, but I can't find it now that I'm looking for it. It involved a Dogman walking up out of the water and onto a beach. Well, the same thing happened to me, or at least a similar thing, so I want to tell you about it. This was 2 years ago, and it was Memorial Day weekend. I had been invited by my friend to join her friends who were going to spend the weekend on a private beach that belonged to one of the rich kids' parents. I don't want to say where it was because I've actually been invited to go back this year for Memorial Day. I'm thinking about saying no, even though I really like the girl that invited me this time, a different one from last time, and one I might end up being more than friends with. But I would blow it if she knew I was terrified of encountering a Dogman on the beach. I mean, if she didn't think I was crazy, she'd think I was a coward. And either way, any chances of becoming her guy would be tossed out the window permanently. So let me just tell you the story of what happened that time 2 years ago when I was there with that other girl. Let's call her Laura, which is not her real name. Now, Laura and I were just friends, but she knew I didn't know anyone else there, and she wasn't interested in any of them anyway, so she mainly hung with me and tried to get me involved in conversations. The main kid's parents were away, and they owned a really nice beach house. We were only allowed to use the bottom level, which was the kids' space, but it was still nicer than my entire family's only home. The others were cool, and they accepted me, so by mid-afternoon we were all having fun together. That night, we built a bonfire and partied as we young adults are wont to do. I don't know what time it was when this all happened, but it was dark out, and we were all pretty partied up, if you know what I mean. I thought I saw something on the other side of the bonfire from me that I couldn't understand. So I walked around the fire and away from the others to get a closer look. Sure enough, in the darkness, I could make out the figure of a man emerging from the ocean itself. He seemed unnaturally dark, and I assumed at first that it was a diver wearing a wetsuit. I felt a sense of danger immediately from this odd sight. In the movies, when someone walks out of the ocean, it means he's a spy or an international criminal or something like that. I tried to adjust my inebriated eyes to the darkness and searched the figure to see if it was carrying anything dangerous looking on his or her person. It was while squinting and staring that I noticed that the figure was just calmly walking up the embankment out of the water and toward the beach as though ascending a staircase. It wasn't walking like it was wearing any flippers, and when it reached the beach I could see that in fact it was not wearing any such thing. It was barefoot, or maybe I should say, its paws were bare. Those feet looked mammalian, but not humanoid. Those were the feet of a dog or a cat or something along those lines, but thicker. Yet it was walking much like a human would. Looking up again at the head, I could see that it was not a man wearing a snorkel or other breathing device as my confused eyes and brain had first assumed. It was a hairy, wet, man-sized dog walking out of the water calmly on its hind legs. I staggered back and fell on the sand in a seated position, watching it walk past me, never looking in my direction. It was walking from my right to my left, maybe 50 or 60 feet in front of me, and heading toward a patch of trees just past the sand of the beach. Laura came up on my right, touching my shoulder, and I jumped and squealed in a high-pitched, surprised voice. This made her giggle, and she plopped down next to me. She was saying I should come back and join the others. Speechless, I looked at her and pointed to where the Dogman was walking. Following my own finger when I looked back, I saw that it had already entered the woods and was gone from sight. Laura mocked me, pointing to the trees with her eyes wide open and her jaw hanging slack, and I realized what it must have looked like to her. We both laughed, and she once again asked me to rejoin the others. I agreed to go back, but asked her to come with me for a second to see something before we headed back. She was cool with that, so we walked about 50 or 60 feet further from the gang. I was searching the beach for footprints, and then I saw them. They looked like cat or dog tracks. I guess they were large-sized, but not as large as I'd expected them to be. Certainly not like Bigfoot tracks or anything like that. I asked her if she could see them too. She laughed and told me she saw sand and dragged me back to the group. Laura's family moved to the West Coast soon after that, so I wasn't invited back to the party last year. But as I had said before, this new and more interesting girl wants me to go this year. I suppose I will be going, because I do really like her and all that, but I have to admit that I'm more than a little freaked out about who else might be attending the party, besides us humans. I keep telling myself that Dogman wasn't interested in me. It was just passing by, and that it never made a threatening move or even looked in my direction. It doesn't matter, though. That thing seems like it can breathe underwater. That can't be just an ordinary animal. Every instinct in me says to stay as far away from that beach as I possibly can, but my head is trying to overrule those feelings. If I go, and if anything else strange happens, I'll send you a follow-up email. In the meantime, wish me luck in avoiding the Dogman that walked out of the water. Stay right there. The old dude has one more trick up his sleeve for today, in the form of another Dogman story. Dogman in the sewer. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a scary Dogman story for you that actually took place in New York, or rather, under it. Hear me out. I know how impossible that premise sounds, but here goes. I have a friend who is friends with urban explorer types, and he's always trying to get me to come along. One time, he told me that the leader of their group, let's call him Greg, had discovered something cool in an area of the sewer system, and he wanted to show the others rather than explain it to them. My friend, let's call him Derwin because he looks like Darren from Bewitched, said I should come along because it was going to be a short adventure, less than a half hour, and I could see what it was like without having to put myself in danger or take much risk. Little did he know, we would encounter a real-life monster in the sewer that day. So I met the others wearing my crappiest clothes, prepared, I thought, for the worst, and even though everything inside me told me that this was a mistake, I decided to be brave and see what all the fuss was about. I want to say before we go any further that I would not do this again, nor am I suggesting any of you should ever try this. Not only is it dangerous, but I'm not sure it's even legal, so please don't try this at home. Or I guess I mean, don't try this in the sewer. Since we were in downtown Manhattan, we had joked before going down there that we might see cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers, like in that old Daniel Stern horror movie. But that only put me on edge more since I actually find that movie really kind of creepy. I know it's a bit corny and all that, but still it creeps me out because in real life, I live not too far from where that was supposed to take place. It's a better neighborhood by far now than it was back when they made that old movie, but at night when I'm walking around, I still watch all the manhole covers to make sure they're not moving and no monsters are lurking underneath them. As soon as we started climbing down the ladder into the sewer, I felt like I was making a mistake. I told myself in my head that I'd be back up on top in the time it took to watch a comedy show on TV, but that didn't make me feel any better about it. There's a smell in the sewer, which I find unappealing. I don't think I can describe it very well, but somehow I think you can guess what I mean. Imagine an entire place that smells like Bigfoot is supposed to smell, only everywhere. So we walked down a ways together. I think there were 9 or 10 of us, and my friend kept pointing out stuff we were passing so that I would know how to get out by myself if we all got separated somehow. The fact that he had a backup plan for if we got separated actually made me more nervous, not less. He told me this was just a short trip and that nothing bad could happen. Already I could see that he was at the very least exaggerating the safety of what we were doing. One way or another, I told myself internally, this was going to be both my first and my last urbex experience. So we were walking down a horrible old tunnel with our guide Greg telling us when it was built and whatever history of the area he knew. I remember none of it. I was just watching out for bugs and rats and so forth. If you don't like vermin, don't go in the sewers. I learned this the hard way. At the end of the tunnel we were walking down, we had to make a sharp right. But before that even happened, something jumped out of that tunnel and kind of barked or shouted at us. Now, I will try to describe what happened in the next 2 or 3 seconds by slowing it all down, because a lot happened all at once. The thing, or person, or animal that jumped out looked like, no, not a monster from that old Danny Stern horror movie, but more like American Werewolf in London, but standing up on its hind legs. And it jumped out in the same way that monsters would jump out at you if you were in an old dark ride in an amusement park. I mean, it had its arms ending in claws at either side of its head, and it had a dog-like head with big fangs. It basically was jumping out and shouting boo at us in its way. It didn't literally say boo, but it might as well have. Now, you might say that means it was someone in a costume pulling a prank on us, or at least on me, but if it was a costumed person, they were extremely tall. Not so tall that it would have been impossible for it to be a man in a costume, but very tall. So I admit, the possibility that it was a person in a costume is still possible, but it doesn't seem likely. I only saw the thing from the back of the crowd of us, but it sure looked and moved like it was real to me. The way the mouth moved was not the way a mask would move at all. And I realized that doesn't mean it wasn't a mask. It was either real, or it was a very sophisticated and expensive mask that you'd have to be dumb to take down in the sewer just to scare 9 or 10 people with. We all screamed and ran back the way we came, including Greg, our guide. I ran up the first ladder I came across. I was hyperventilating, which with me can sometimes lead to panic attacks that feel just like heart attacks and can cause me to pass out. I wanted fresh air and sunshine as quickly as possible, and I didn't care what manhole cover I went through to get it. When I reached the top of the ladder, I found the cover was impossible to move. It seemed to be stuck or sealed. I then had the strangest feeling of déjà vu, not for my own life, but for the life of the Daniel Stern character in that old monster movie. Not to give out a spoiler, but there's a scene in that film where Daniel Stern cannot emerge from the sewer because the bad guy had parked a truck over the manhole cover, sealing him down there with the monsters. If you've never had déjà vu for a scene in a horror movie, count yourself as lucky, because it is not a pleasant experience. I realized I had no choice but to climb back down there and try another escape, and when I got back down, Derwin was there, waiting for me and lecturing me not to run away from him again. He made me promise to stay with him, which I gladly did, and he led me back to where we came in. Once we got up top, I literally ran away from that group. While they were still talking to me, I just didn't care what they had to say. I wanted to go home, take a shower, and pull the covers up over my head. One of the original points of the trip was to film the experience, but Greg said he actually dropped his cell phone down there when the monster jumped out and shouted at us. I didn't believe any of that at first, but supposedly, when he went back to retrieve it, the phone was actually gone, and when he tried to call it, nobody picked up. I heard from both Derwin and Greg, and they both seemed sincere. Greg later showed me his new phone to prove it, but I don't remember what his old one looked like, so it proved nothing to me. I still don't really know if the whole thing was a prank to scare me, but those two guys have stuck to their stories so far, and I don't know the other people who were with us, so I don't know their side of things at all. For these reasons, I can't say I'm 100% sure what actually happened, but maybe, just maybe, I might have actually seen a Dogman in the sewer. Oh, they'll call me crazy, and they'll tell you not to believe me, but they'll run the story because what else can they do? All my Dogman stories are gripping because I personally lived through them, no matter what they say. This story took place one time when I was trying to get away from humanity. You see, these people here aren't the first to get under my skin. I tried my best to be a hermit a number of times, but it wasn't meant to be. This is the reason that now, in my old age, I'm forced to live among all of you. I know you don't like me. You just want me to tell you stories. Then you'll go and watch someone else tell some other story. Most of you won't even say thank you to an old man, will you? And yet, here I am telling you the God's honest truth about all the many times that Dogman has come right up and messed with me. Now this time, I was staying in a cabin, but I didn't have enough money to rent it for another month, so I knew I was going to have to either go live off the land or ask my Aunt Sylvia if I could move back in. The wolf was figuratively at the door that night, and I was as sad could possibly be. I decided to walk off into the snowy forest in the dark night and let nature have its way with me. I didn't want to live another day so I was just going to allow myself to be exposed to the winter forest at night and hopefully be out of my misery before the morning. I know I was very dramatic in those days, but you have to understand how annoying your species is to me and how much I dreamt of peace and quiet. So I put on my coat, then realized that would defeat the purpose of my endeavor, and I took it right back off. I opened that cabin door to go outside and take my final walk. But do you know what I saw when I opened that door? Wait, I'll show you what I saw. Where are those green screens you people use? What? Huh? Well, get me set up in front of one of those things. I want to show the people something. There. You see that? That is what was standing outside my cabin door that night. It was a hairy man with a wolf head. He was just standing there, staring at me, breathing. He seemed curious about me, but didn't take a step toward me. I didn't take a step toward it either. I took a step backward and went back into the cabin. It's funny how a 7-foot-tall dog-headed predator can take you right out of feeling suicidal. Suddenly I was terrified and desperate to find a way to survive. I peeked out the front door window, and he was still there. I could feel him there, even when I wasn't looking. It was almost as if those yellow eyes could see right through the walls of the cabin, right through my skin, and directly into my soul and mind. It was as if he was daring me to come and give myself up to him if I was really so tired with life. Obviously, I wasn't, so I didn't. In my opinion, I behaved like a child at that point. I retreated to the bedroom and threw myself under the cover, pulling it up over my head. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I could feel the eyes outside still staring at me, still boring into me. I got up and creeped to the front door, listening and hearing nothing. Rather than peek out the front door again, I quickly positioned myself at one of the front windows, mentally prepared to squint into the darkness to see if the creature was still on the property. I didn't need to do that. I looked out the window, and what I saw was this. I fell backward and hit my head on some wooden furniture. I was too dizzy to get up, and I was forced to lay there looking through bleary eyes out at the monster just inches on the other side of that glass. How silver it looked. The entire animal was monochrome other than its eyes. I imagined its tongue would have been red, but it didn't show me. It just stared, as though I were the most interesting thing it had ever seen. Or really, it stared at me as though I were the only interesting thing it had ever seen. I could hear it breathing there, just outside the cabin. I could see its massive chest heaving as it breathed in more air than any human's lungs could ever hold. Why was it there? And why was it so interested in me? We spent that night together, that Dogman and myself. We stared and stared, and then I woke up and realized he must have won the staring contest. The strange thing about that morning was,
Even though I was technically broke and homeless, I felt far more alive than I had the night before. Whatever that was that I had lived through, at least I had lived through it. I can't remember exactly what I did next with my life, but I do remember I did it with a renewed enthusiasm. And that was entirely because of the breathing Dogman.
Can you tell us another one? We have more time to film.
What? No. If you want more, you'll have to start paying me more. That's all you get, and you'll be happy with it too. We'll be right back with another cryptid tale right after this. In the description of this video, we've got a link to our new Scary Stories t-shirt. It's our classic skull logo, and it says Scary Stories underneath in the kaiju monster font. It comes in black and also black and other dark colors such as black. Good for ladies or gentlemen, hoodies too, whatever you need. Psychic Bigfoot controls my life. As told to and read by Peter Bernard. My family has a Bigfoot habituation problem. I'm not saying all Bigfoot habituations are necessarily problems, but ours is. This is largely because this particular strain of Bigfoot is not a simple primate. It's far more intelligent than we are, and it is able to control us through a combination of infrasound and hypnotic mental telepathy. The more intelligent you are, the more you can hold on to bits of your own free will. But my mother-in-law, for instance, has no resistance to the creature's control at all. We first started to notice these monsters back in the autumn of 2003, about a month or two after we had first moved in. All our offspring were now off at college, and we were finally able to have some time for ourselves. Or so we thought. Soon after, my wife's father passed on, and her mother came to live with us. She would scream every time she saw a Bigfoot in the trees staring back at her that she had just seen a Yeti. Soon enough, she stopped shouting about it and just got into a routine of staring back at it. I didn't mind because it made her serene, and more important, it quieted her down for a while. Now, I should have noticed something was wrong right there. Why would my reaction to Sasquatches appearing at the edges of our property each day be bland and bored? Granted, I was distracted and annoyed by my mother-in-law intruding on the peace that I'd worked 40 years to be able to gain for myself and my wife, but still, we're talking about Bigfoot here. Why did I never think to take a picture? It's a good question, and one that a neighbor asked me one day when I was telling him about the habituation. And you know what? I couldn't answer him. It should have been a logical thing to do. So I told him that the next time I saw one, or heard that my mother-in-law was seeing one, I would try to get a shot. He even lent me his camera with a telephoto lens. So, the next day, I noticed the old woman standing at one of the side windows in the house, staring. I looked out the window, and I was pretty sure I saw a large figure in the woods in the direction she was looking. Racing outside with my camera, I set up the tripod as quickly as I could and leaned in to get a good view. I found the monster and zoomed in as far as I could, eager to finally understand what exactly I was looking at. I could only make out shadows at first, but then the thing took a step forward out of the tree line, and I could see its eyes. I would have taken a picture then, but those eyes didn't want me to.
I saw all the pain and sorrow of the world in those eyes, and I felt deep empathy for them. I put the camera down and looked, and I could still see them just as clearly. Any time I see any of the creatures looking at me since then, I can see them in great detail, and I can hear everything they are saying. Our son Miles came home to visit us over Christmas break, and he soon fell victim to the creatures himself. He would stare at one of them every afternoon, and it changed him. When he went back to school, he changed his major. He changed his girlfriend. He started using some nickname as his first name. I had always thought that Miles was the most definite person I had ever known. He had this fully formed personality almost as soon as he was born, and he never changed a slight bit all through his growing up. Now, he was suddenly a very different person and didn't even respond to his own name any longer. And it was because of that Sasquatch, or the group of them. They insult humanity all the time. They remind us of our limits. We don't have the second sight like they do. We aren't as advanced in a number of ways as they are. We have technology, and they view that as a crutch. Just one more reason to laugh at our feebleness in relation to their great might. You don't know how boring it is to hear this psychic monkey tell you how dumb you are every single day. I would move, but the Bigfoot say they will let us know when they are done with us, and that time has not arrived yet. I wish they would change my mother-in-law's personality, but so far, that hasn't happened. And so, that's my story. My paradise has become a prison, and it's all because psychic Bigfoot controls my life. My mother didn't realize she was dead. I read a bunch of two-line horror stories, and one of them went something like, "My mother wakes me up for school each morning, but I work at a bank and she died 30 years ago." I'm probably remembering it wrong. I think that was a one-line horror story the way I told it, but you get the point. When I read that one, it wasn't funny in the ha-ha way to me. It sent a shudder through me. That's because I really have a problem almost identical to that. My mother died suddenly and unexpectedly a week before I was set to get my undergraduate degree. I don't think she ever realized that she had passed on, as we immediately were living in a haunted house. Yes, some of the manifestations were poltergeist-like, and so I know some of you listening will say that means it was coming from the psychic emanations of the people grieving around her. I can't say for sure if that's true or not, but each time something would move, it was something related to my mother, and it seemed as though she were there with us, making all this happen. Obviously, there's a huge gap between feeling something is so and being able to prove scientifically that it is objectively so. But there were other things that happened as well. My aunt, who came to stay with us for the funeral, kept smelling my mother's perfume in places where it seemed out of place. One time, she was sitting on a lawn chair in our yard, watching some birds in a tree, and she could smell my mother there briefly. Another time, it happened when she was in the pantry looking for breakfast cereal. Both times, the smell came with a warmth, not with the usual coldness associated with spirit manifestations. Like I said, I don't think my mother ever got it that she was supposed to be a ghost now. In the morning, I would smell breakfast being made downstairs. Sadly, it was not real, just another illusory odor. Could my own mind have been manufacturing the scent? I suppose, possibly. I thought about talking to my mother and explaining to her that she had passed on, that I could make my own breakfast now, and she should enjoy her eternal reward. But I didn't have the heart to. I mean, I was a little lonely in that big house. Both my parents were gone, but they had left me enough money to live comfortably until I got through school. I was studying to become a doctor, so as long as I stayed in the house I inherited, I'd be fine financially until I could start earning my own income and supporting myself through contributing to society. But like I said, that was if I stayed in that house. So it was never a question to me about selling it, which could take years. It was worth much more to me as a dwelling than it would earn me since the neighborhood had degraded. I wouldn't be able to get half of what it was worth. So I sort of accepted the idea of living with the spirit of my mother, if I even gave it that much thought. I was so busy that I'm not sure I thought about much except work, school, sleep. Each morning, just like in the two-line horror story, I would wake up when the voice of my mother called from downstairs that it was time for school, exactly like in that story. As I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel in my postgraduate work some years down the line, I met a young woman studying similar things to me, and we fell in love almost off the bat. We became friends in class, then lunch dates, then eventually dinner dates, and I realized it had become time to take stock of my life and my house. I needed to clean both up before I could invite this young woman into either. Let's call her D, just for the sake of this story. I started to wonder if I brought D home, how would my mother react? That's how real the spirit seemed to me at that point. I didn't question at all that my mother was staying in the house. It was just a given fact to me. At first, Dee loved the place and seemed to feel comfortable there. My mother was nowhere to be seen or heard. When we decided to get serious about our relationship, Dee moved out of her apartment and into the house with me. That was when everything went haywire. The first morning I woke up with Dee next to me in my home, it was not to the smell of breakfast cooking downstairs, nor was it to the voice of my mother telling me it was time for school. Instead, I woke up to the smell of something burning downstairs. Leaping up and running down in my underpants, I saw smoke billowing out of the kitchen. I quickly threw windows open wherever I could and turned on one of the ceiling fans. As I did so, multiple fire alarms went off at once. I had to find the source and put it out first before I could deal with the alarms. It turned out the toaster had blown up or caught on fire. It was old, so I didn't really think much about it, and I certainly didn't think it was a paranormal occurrence. It was my mother's old toaster, and it probably should have blown up years ago. I put on one of her rubber gloves and unplugged it, then turned off the alarms. Dee helped me open the rest of the windows, then we went out back to cough a while. She told me she hoped that I didn't believe in omens, which made me laugh because I was thinking of saying the same thing to her. Well, it's possible that the toaster blowing up was just a random event, but we went out and got a new one, replacing the old coffee machine with a modern one while we were at it. Dee contacted an electrician, we had the wiring of the place checked out and everything upgraded. We didn't expect anything more along those lines, and we didn't get it. but we got other creepy things happening to us instead. Dee started telling me she saw shadows behind her in the hallway at night when she would get up to use the bathroom. They were never still, always moving around. She said it was like a short person, an adult about 5 foot tall, maybe a couple inches taller. My mother was 5'2", so my mind immediately flashed on her. Her manifestations had always seemed so positive before Dee moved in. I was starting to understand that I was going to have to make some decisions soon, and then I was going to have to act on those decisions. Before I could do anything, I was going to have to tell Dee about my mom, or at least tell her about the strange activity I'd experienced after her passing. I tried to remain agnostic and say it might have been my mother, but I was pretty certain about it, and Dee seemed to think it made the most sense that it would be her, especially since nobody had ever talked about ghosts in the house before she died. Why my father never came back, I don't know, but I don't think my mom ever left. Dee thought that the first thing we should try would be to introduce her to my mom, since maybe she was just insulted at not having met Dee formally. I thought that might do some good because even if the spirit was just a series of manifestations of our subconscious, having a ritual in which we attempted to speak to and placate the angry spirit might function as well psychologically to appeal to the part of our subconscious which had become upset as it would if we were speaking to a literal ghost. Which is not to say my mom hadn't become a literal ghost, because at the time that was still actually my number one theory. So we staged a somewhat formal meeting in the living room where I introduced my mother to Dee and explained that she was going to be living there now. We told her that we were fine with my mom staying if she wanted to, but that we could make our own breakfast, and if she wanted, we could probably even make some for her. On the other hand, we pointed out that my father probably hadn't had a square meal the entire time he'd been in heaven, so maybe she might want to go take care of him instead. We felt pretty proud of ourselves and thought we had solved everything. We were certain that my mother would be rational about it. That night, we both had terrible nightmares, and Dee woke up with a series of 3 scratch marks in 3 different places on her lower back. I was furious at my mother, as we had just spent all our extra money on fixing the electricity, and we were not at liberty to move or stay in a hotel. We had to stay in that house, and we both worked 18-hour days at the hospital. We discussed having a paranormal investigator team come out, but we both needed a place to sleep, usually at different times of the day, and it was just impossible to schedule. We finally ended up renting rooms with different friends until we were able to swing a deal to get a cheap place together almost a year later. In all that time, the house stood there unoccupied. Dee pressed me to talk to real estate people about either selling or renting the place, but I didn't think my mother would like those people any more than she'd like Dee. It just seemed irresponsible to sell the place to someone who couldn't possibly understand what they were getting themselves into. Somehow, we managed the financial storms without selling the house until we both had matured a bit and gained successful positions. Now, we finally had the time to refocus on the problem of my mother's house. I decided I would go back and spend a week there and was surprised when Dee wanted to join me. At first, we only cleaned up the bedroom, dining room, and TV room as we were feeling very tentative about even being at the location. Rather than going in with an exorcist or whatever, we thought we'd get the vibrations of the location first and then decide what to do about it. Anyway, the short version of the story is that we didn't experience anything unusual that first night, nor the second night, nor the third, and before the end of the week we had begun renovations on parts of the place and started moving our stuff in. We've now been back in my childhood home for over a decade and have 2 kids of our own growing up there. I've never heard or smelled my mother's spirit, and neither of us have had any more than the normal amount of nightmares. Our kids never tell us about shadow beings or anything creepy in their rooms at night, and it feels like sometime between when we moved out and when we moved back in, my mother realized she was late for her date on the other side. I hope she's with my dad, and I'm glad my kids were never haunted, because my mother didn't realize she was dead.
Welcome to Dr. Death's Ghostorama. Open your ears and open your mind.
Have you ever gotten so lost in just being someplace that you forget what you're doing or who you even are? I heard birds. I heard squirrels. I heard a hawk or some other kind of bird of prey crying very far away. And then I realized I couldn't remember why I was there. I seemed to be on a dirt path next to a 2-lane highway in the woods. At once, panic gripped me, and I struggled to recognize the location. I felt something in my hand and looked down to see an empty plastic gasoline container. Oh, that's right. I had run out of gas. Looking around, I recognized this as the way I drive home from Parsippany. I must have been on Berkshire Valley Road, Route 699, probably about a half-mile away from the gas station in the next town over, which I think is called Woodstock. I have had the misfortune of dealing with that gas station a few times and have a bad relationship with the two guys who are usually working there. They have this weird habit of making fun of me or insulting me in odd ways. They'll act like I'm not there or give me too little change and insist I bought something I never did. They think they're really funny. I always swear to never go back there, and yet fate always sends me back for another round with the Happiness Twins. This was stupid. Why hadn't I called for someone to come help me? I reached in my pocket and was alarmed to not find my cell phone there. I searched all my pockets and found it nowhere. Great. That must be why I started walking in the first place. Well, I had another 5 or 10 minutes before I was even going to reach that nirvana of a gas station. Lucky me. I get to trudge and trudge before I gain my reward. And then I get to walk back loaded down with highly flammable liquids. How long had I been walking anyway? I turned behind me, but of course I didn't see my car. I had a longer than a 5-minute walk back, that was all I could be sure of, since I had blissed out on the afternoon instead of paying attention to things. Still, it felt like my senses were heightened, and it was a stunningly beautiful, warm, early spring day. Everything around me seemed so alive. I heard something in the forest, something that sounded large. Of course, sometimes a raccoon could sound large under the right circumstances. I decided to walk a little faster. So did whatever was in the woods. I tried my best not to curse in my head. My mother told me that when you're in danger, cursing scares the angels away and limits how much they can help you. I know that sounds dumb, but when I think I might be in danger, I'm deathly afraid of saying a bad word, even in my head. It's a freaky superstition I have thanks to my upbringing. The sound seemed to follow me and stay an equal distance away in the trees no matter what speed I went. I looked in the gasoline container to see if something was inside that, rattling around and echoing. I put it in my other hand and still heard the same sound recommencing each time, a half-second after I would start to walk again. I tried to convince myself it was an echo, just a strange one, and settled into a fast-paced walk. I thought I could keep that pace up for 5 minutes until I was there, so it was just me, my plastic gas can, and my echo. Me, my plastic gas can, and my echo. After a while of just listening to those 3 things, I noticed that my feet were making gravelly noises because I was walking on dirt, rocks, and gravel. My echo, though? My echo was making sounds as though it were walking through foliage and stepping on twigs. That wasn't an echo. I stopped and froze and stared into the forest. That was an illogical thing to do, but I was panicking. I was certain someone or something was stalking me, and I wanted to know what or who it was. Then I wondered if I really wanted to know and decided to run. As I decided this, even before I could turn to run, I saw something emerging from the forest. It walked right out and stood there. I spun in a circle, continuing to sort of run away, but spinning to see this thing. It didn't seem to be following me anymore. It was almost as if it were following me just to show itself to me. It looked like some kind of diseased bear with deer horns. Are there bears that have deer horns in New Jersey? I don't think so. Could this be some kind of genetic mutation, maybe? I mean, we are talking about New Jersey, even if this isn't as toxic as some other parts of it. This thing looked like it had died 10 years ago. The fur was shaggy in some spots, but patchy or missing in others. It seemed incredibly thin, and its head looked long and narrow, almost like an Irish wolfhound, if an Irish wolfhound had antlers. It just stood there, standing about 6.5, 7 feet tall before counting the antlers. I jogged backwards, out of breath, and eventually just stopped and stared at the thing. Even with how thin it was, the head seemed too small for the body, and too small to be holding those antlers. It was so dark that I was really watching its eyes and its outline more than anything. I would get ideas about its appearance from when it would turn so I could see it in space. From my point of view, it was almost like the thing was both 3D and 2D at once. But I did not actually think that. I thought it was an optical illusion just from my one point of view. I think I stood watching it and breathing for 15 seconds or more. Then, I just went back to walking, checking over my shoulder every few steps. One time when I looked, it wasn't there anymore. That sent fear through me and I started walking faster again. Part of me was saying internally that the creature got bored of me and left, but the lizard brain inside me knew that the thing was back to stalking me. I started trying to walk faster instead of running. I didn't want to get so winded that I had to stop, only to have that bear, dog, deer thing pop out of the trees and say boo. Suddenly, my mind hit on an idea and I felt relief wash over me, like cool goo from one of those old Nickelodeon game shows. A cosplayer! It must have been a cosplayer! All my fear left me. Wait, a cosplayer in the woods? In New Jersey? Dressed as a mangy dead bear with antlers? That was probably some kind of serial killer. A normal cosplayer isn't going to be in the woods doing his thing. Ha! I just realized I may have coined a new term. Normal cosplayer. I giggled to myself. What if I was the first to ever realize what an oxymoron that was? Then, I heard a growling sound from the woods to my right, and I wondered if I would be the last to make that realization. Now I ran. I ran as fast as I could. Then I got exhausted and panted for breath, then ran some more. Repeating this pattern, I eventually made it to the gas station that I never really wanted to get to in the first place. Under the circumstances, though, it looked like the holy city of lights compared to where I had been. Maybe I could talk the two lame brains into giving me a lift back to my car for some amount of money. I really didn't want to make that walk back alone. I waved my empty gas container at the idiots inside the station's office, but neither of them seemed to notice me. Morons. Probably too busy finding out what their ex-girlfriends had for lunch on Facebook to do their own jobs. I started filling up my container, and then I'd go inside and pay them afterward. They were so completely lazy. They must be able to see me filling my can, but they didn't even come over to monitor their situation. I could lie to them about how much gas I was buying. They wouldn't even figure it out for a week, if ever. I could probably walk away without paying. That's how lazy they were. I wouldn't do something like that. It would only give them more fuel to use in their mockery of me. After filling it up as high as I thought I could carry back, I headed to the office, bracing myself for what was to come. I had to get them to give me a lift back. After filling it up as high as I thought I could carry back since it had no lid, I headed to the office, bracing myself for what was to come. I had to get them to give me a lift back, and so I was already trying to think of how to do it. I had no ideas, or no good ones. First things first, I walked in the office and up to the counter. True to form, both cretins ignored me and stared, wide-eyed, at the door closing behind me. "Did you see that?" asked the dumb one. "Do you mean the door? Or the wind that blew it open?" asked the dumber one. "You can't see wind, you idiot," the dumb one pointed out. "Well, why do you think I was asking you why you asked if I seen it? Ain't nobody can't not see the wind, am I right?" Both of them laughed long and hard, then seemed to forget what they were laughing at, and settled back into staring at their phones. I cleared my throat. They ignored me. I told them how much I owed them. No response. I asked them to ring it up for me, and they just kept staring at their phones. I was having a bad day, so I lost my temper. Raising my voice, I insisted that if they were not going to tell me how much I owed them, I was just going to leave with all this gas and not pay them a dime. No response. Utterly infuriated, I stormed out of the place and walked a few steps away, then looked back. They were still sitting there. They were actually going to let me leave. I kept walking until I was nearly back to the highway. Then I remembered that I wanted to ask those two guys to give me a lift back. I was so angry at them in that moment, though, that I forgot how scary that thing in the woods was. I was so ticked off. I had this feeling about me that nobody better mess with me. I figured the creature had been attracted to me last time because I had seemed too timid. I was walking along confused, so naturally the creature came over to investigate to see if I might be prey. I think it decided that I would probably put up too much of a fight to be worth whatever meal he'd get out of me. But then all of a sudden I remembered it had sounded like it had gone back to stalking me further on. So then I looked around for something I could use as a weapon. There were a lot of branches on the ground. I found a V-shaped branch about 2 or 3 inches thick, put my foot on one half and pulled it in half with my arms. I could hold it in one hand while I walked with the can in my other, but I couldn't go very fast without spilling the gas. If I needed to use it, I was going to have to put the gas can down and go at my adversary with both hands on my makeshift baseball bat. I started imagining moves I might have to make and focused on keeping my breathing regular and my emotions calm. I tried to hear everything around me, and after a while, it sounded as though the wind were crying. It wasn't an animal or a person, since it was coming from all around at once. For this reason, I figured it must be a natural occurrence in this area that I had never noticed when I was driving. After all, I usually either have my windows up for AC or for heat. This was the first time I was ever just walking here. Even though I knew it had to just be air whistling through trees or caverns or something, it sure sounded like the saddest kind of wailing. It was starting to bring me down, and I tried to think more positive thoughts. I noticed something white on the ground across the highway. I couldn't figure out what it was. Looking both ways before crossing, it occurred to me that I hadn't seen any traffic all this time. I stopped before fully crossing when I saw that it was a deer skull. Not a new one, judging by how white it had been bleached. The antlers stretched tall, like the ones on that bear thing. The bear thing. As soon as I thought of it, I could hear it, back on the side of the highway I had just come from. Instantly breaking into a jog, I wished I had begged those guys at the gas station for a ride. I wished I had stolen a car to ride back. It wouldn't have been stealing, really. Maybe I could still double back and do it. I stopped for a second, and I swear I thought I could hear that thing speeding up, as though it were heading in for the kill. I panicked. I ran, spilling gas everywhere and not caring. I only needed enough to get home. I only needed a gallon, really. I could get more in the morning. I only needed to get some gas in my car and to get home. Then I would be safe. Then this insanity would be over. Then I could Google bears with antlers or cosplay mangy bears or whatever I wanted. Then I could go back to being a human being. But right then, at that moment, what I was something much closer to a scared rabbit than a person. My personality had been reduced to nothing but survival instinct. I just wanted to get out of this. I wanted to survive. Running and crying, I grew tired pretty fast but ran anyway. It seemed that no matter how tired I got, I could manage to keep going anyway. It was utter agony and the most unpleasant thing I had ever experienced. It was either the extreme discomfort of running more than you're capable of running, or else get eaten alive by some animal thing that shouldn't possibly even be able to exist. I wasn't even watching where I was going anymore when I tripped over something in the road and fell hard on my face. Getting up, I noticed how dark it had gotten. It was really nighttime already. How long had I been running? Had I passed out after I fell? I got up to see what I had tripped over and screamed in shock and horror. It was a man laying face down on the road. It looked like he was the victim of a hit and run. He wasn't moving, and I wasn't sure if he was breathing or not. In his right hand, he held... Wow, that was weird. He held a gas can, a plastic one, just like mine, even the same yellowish-green color. I tried to pick it up, but his hand was locked onto it in a literal death grip. So then, this guy must really be there, over by his left hand. A cell phone. It must have dropped out of his hand when he fell. Maybe I could figure out his name from it, then call and get him an ambulance and me a lift back to my car. Wow, he had the same model as me. This guy and I had a lot in common. There, but for the grace of God go I thought internally. It was another superstition taught to me by my mother. If you see someone enduring something you would rather avoid, remember, it could be you next time. Never rejoice in the suffering of others, and always treat them as you would want to be treated in the same circumstances. Let's see. If we go into this guy's phone, we should at least get his number, if not his name. There it is. Wow, it's so similar to... No, wait. His number is my number. This isn't his phone, this is my phone. How did this guy get my phone? I was filled with the intense need to see this man's face and to understand what was going on. With all my strength, I turned his rigid body over and looked with horror on his face. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. Because it was my face. I was looking at my own dead self. I shrieked and cried and wailed. I saw the thing with antlers coming out of the forest. It was still terrifying to me, but it was no longer strange. I knew why it was here now. It was here to guide me to where I needed to go next. It was here to take me away from the land of the living. And that is the true story of how I died.
Thus ends another tale of the dead told by the dead. If you've passed on and want to tell us about it, feel free to call our ghost-only hotline. The number is visible on the screen. if you're dead. Bye for now, mortals.
The One-Eyed Sasquatch of Bluff Creek, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Retribution. I saw a one-eyed Sasquatch. It wasn't missing an eye, though. It was a cyclops. This happened just this past summer, and no, I did not get a photo of the creature, but I will tell you everything exactly as it happened to me to the best of my memory. Full disclosure, I am a Bigfoot enthusiast, and I was hiking on the Bluff Creek Trail, specifically hoping to see or hear a Sasquatch. I would not call myself a researcher, just a fan, and since Finding Bigfoot went off the air, I've been jonesing for more Bigfoot in my life. So, a buddy who I'll call Sam and I went hiking just to put a little squatchiness back in our lives. It was a lovely hike, I have to say. We took it very slow because we're not avid hikers, but we had more of a chance to observe and appreciate our surroundings that way. If you ask me if you should go there, I would respond with a resounding yes, although obviously you'd be safer in a large group than we were as just a couple. So we were nearing the end of the trail and it was getting dark. We decided to hang out in a forested area and watch it turn to night because we knew we were only 5 minutes away from the parking lot that our car was in. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened all day, so we had gathered a false sense of security around ourselves. Plus, we were both of the Bigfoot is a kind and loving forest neighbor persuasion. We were like Bobo. We just wanted the honor of seeing a Bigfoot with our own eyes, and never dreamed that we might be placing ourselves in harm's way. So, there we were, sitting leaning against a tree, noticing the change in atmosphere and background sounds as night takes over out there. It gave me goosebumps. We were getting scared, but it was still in a fun way, you know? Like a scary movie. We were saying things to each other like, "This is the exact area Bigfoot walks around in at night." And, "Can you imagine if we were here just a few hours from now? What we might see?" So we were revving each other up, but we still weren't comprehending that we might be being watched at that very instant by a large, probably omnivorous, and definitely intelligent hunting beast twice our size. That's when the smell hit us. It was just like they always describe it on TV. It was wet dog smell, plus garbage, plus everything else bad you've ever smelled. Even though we had been talking about Bigfoot, neither of us at first registered that this was what we were smelling. I guess to us, Sasquatch was still something from TV. I think Sam made a joke about silent but deadly, and I made one about whoever smelt it dealt it, but very quickly our entire worldview was abruptly rearranged. Something made a terrible crashing noise in the trees just to my right and her left. Sam and I stood up and backed away just before we saw this thing emerge from the woods not even 20 feet away from us. It was Bigfoot, just like you'd expect to see him, except he was much taller, and he had only one eye right in the middle of his forehead. I had dreamed my entire adult life about meeting Sasquatch. I had dreamed about getting to see one from a distance. I had dreamed about getting to hear the roar of a Sasquatch off in the forest at night. I had a very romantic view of the creature, or
entity or whatever it is. I felt it was probably a vegetarian, and it was shy and timid. Well, as it turns out, the Bigfoot we met was 9 or 10 feet tall, had only one eye, and was extremely angry that we were there. My dream of getting to hear a Bigfoot call was fulfilled, but it was an extremely unpleasant and frightening experience as this creature was yelling directly at me and my friend. It was so loud that I couldn't hear anything for a while after. Its terrible breath was hot and wet and overwhelming. It was brutal and felt like it lasted an hour, but probably couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 seconds. I remember running back to the car. It was the longest 4 or 5 minutes of my life. I tripped repeatedly. I felt very uncoordinated. Possibly part of that was due to my not being able to hear much of anything at all for the entire run back. I was intensely paranoid that the Cyclops Bigfoot was behind us because I couldn't hear behind me where he was going. I remember looking behind one time and seeing him, so every second after that, I was convinced he was still chasing us. We got in the car, and Sam was trying to say something to me, but I couldn't hear what it was. I remember trying to read her lips when there it was, the Cyclops beast. It was in the parking lot, and it was running toward us, still just as angry as it had been before. I literally turned the key in the engine for her, and she got the idea and sped out of there. The creature chased us right out onto the highway, and for a while I thought he was gonna catch up. It turns out you don't have to move your legs as fast if you're 9 or 10 feet tall. I've heard that a one-eyed person or animal has no binocular vision, and therefore no depth perception, but this Bigfoot seemed to have no problem at all judging where we were in space and time. To say that we were lucky to get away is an understatement. I couldn't hear well for 3 days after. Now, we both don't want to report this story publicly and officially for a very simple reason. It would cast Bigfoot in a very bad light. I'm sure most Bigfoot are not like this one that we encountered, and yet, at the same time, I feel that the story should be told, because maybe this might explain some missing person cases. I mean, maybe the reason nobody reports one-eyed Cyclops Bigfoot is that nobody else has so far survived an encounter with one. So, I'm torn. Would I be betraying Sasquatch if I convinced Sam to come public with me about this terrifying encounter? Would I be making Bigfoot's life even harder than it already is? Or would I be doing a public service and warning people about a danger that they would not otherwise have heard of? And so, I'm torn about whether I should come forward or not with the truth about the one-eyed Sasquatch of Bluff Creek. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday
for an all new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary. Come back for more scary stories.